Good to see you again.
Pleasure.
We have a group of about 15 of us here. Rather than introducing ourselves, I just will probably give you a gist. My name is Robi Singh, and I am working for Amgen, and I'm essentially going to be moderating. We have about an hour, and what we have is a collection of colleagues here from the industry, also from India, as well as from here in the US. But more importantly, okay, sorry. But more importantly, I think that we also have members from the US government, from the state level as well as the federal level. What I'll do is I'll start moderating the discussion, but again, this is being co-sponsored by TII as well as people. And the purpose of this meeting is to just get us talk with each other about various activities on topics of biosimilars, clinical trials, and essentially how India can become a preferred destination for all these activities for multinational companies, for example, like Amgen, and we have colleagues from Roche as well. I'd like to let Dr. Bhan and K Raghavan the opening comments.
I'm sorry, we lost you there. Can you hear us?
We can hear you well. Can you hear? Yes.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
So we missed your last sentence.
I said I would like you to give the opening remarks and then set the tone for the meeting, and then we'll essentially have more of a Q&A kind of discussion.
Just say so.
Yeah. So first of all, our apologies for not being there, and Minister Jayapal Reddy also apologizes for not being able to come to Chicago for this very important meeting. Parliament is in session in India, and Monday was the first day of Parliament after the budget recess, and it's very important that he be there, and it was important that I be there because some important bills are being tabled in Parliament. But nevertheless, even though we are not able to make it, we consider this meeting extremely important, as does my predecessor, Dr. Bhan, as does the Indian Council for Medical Research and the Indian Agricultural Research Institute, the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. So we're all over here, and we're very happy to be here to discuss with you. And you mentioned a list of possible topics, and I think we could start by hearing from you about your questions, and one of us or more than one of us will be ready to answer. Dr. Bhan?
Yeah, I think that's quite fine. You know, we could. I understand there are a number of issues on the table today. There are issues for discussions with you. There are also issues for discussion among ourselves in India, and I think transparent, sincere discussion is the best way to engage, and we're very happy to engage with you. So if you start with a couple of issues, and we'll tell you what's happening here.
With that, I will let Dr. Vijay from Commerce make some remarks, and then we can take off from there.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good day.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us. We, of course, wish you could be here in person to see the beautiful India pavilion that they have here at Bio. I think this is one of the nicest looking ones that we've had at a Bio conference. But, of course, we understand that the Parliament schedule drives your need to be in India. So we do appreciate your taking the time to join us this way. And it's always wonderful to see Dr. Bhan again. We miss him, and we're glad to be able to work with him in any capacity. Okay. We are delighted to have all three of you with us virtually here at Bio. Last year at Bio, Dr. Bhan very graciously offered to receive input from the private sector on the new biosimilar guidelines. And I would be curious to know if you have received those kinds of inputs from Indian companies, U.S. companies, from other companies, and how that process
what has happened since then is, when the biosimilar guidelines were announced, we had said that we will wait for a year before any revisions are made, so that the inputs that come from different sources, there have been a lot of meetings and discussions with the Indian industry on absorbing the issues. We've done some learning since then, and now there is a technical committee for set up by on the direction of the Supreme Court, and also an apex committee chaired by the health secretary to resolve all residual issues about regulation. And they are consulting, they are meeting, they are getting inputs, and it is a very able group of people, people with very open minds, and they are engaged in the discussion. I myself had a round with them, and it is my expectation that in a month or two, the final operational guidelines for biosimilars, but also for clinical trials and a whole lot of issues will be resolved. That process is on, and it is very intense and serious right now. So we are in the process of kind of taking a relook at everything.
I should add to Dr. Bhan's important statement that I've just taken over slightly over 2 months ago, and it is extraordinarily refreshing to see how engaged people at every arm of our state, whether it's the judiciary, the legislature, the government, civil servants, scientific community are. We all see this as a crucial and important issue. All the views are on the table, and I think we should move very rapidly to having things settled now.
Thank you for that. Maybe I should see if any of the companies here have any questions they would like to ask.
So, Tom, from Roche.
We now have a gentleman from Roche named Thomas. I'm going to let you see your own last name. I'm not better with the Indian name than I am with your
Hello, actually it's quite a difficult German name. My last name is called Schreibmüller, so difficult to pronounce. No, actually I was, it was interesting your comments you were saying. In fact, there were messages going out last year that any product, any biosimilar product that should be registered in India as of August 15 would apply to the standard outlined in the biosimilar guidelines at this point in time. So what I heard from you now before, so this is actually not correct then?
Well, you see, the guidelines have been declared and are valid. But what happened in between is that on a number of other issues about clinical trials, the Supreme Court, on the basis of some litigations, expressed concern that all the stakeholders are not satisfied with the regulatory process and the procedures, and therefore asked a technical committee to look at everything. And because of that review by the court, they are also looking at how to operationalize the guidelines for biosimilars as well as chemical entities. So it is not on hold, it is just that the SOPs and the processes are being examined to create an implementation pathway.
Okay, well, because in reality, actually, last week there came out some messages that eventually a new rituximab monoclonal antibody has been, by a company called Intras, has been registered in India. We were looking, in fact, at the kind of clinical trials that have been made in order to get this product registered. And in fact, there are really some concerns, you know, if you really carefully analyze these data, whether this truly ensures patient safety. And so I'm wondering, in fact, how is your idea, how do you want to deal with all of these ongoing things in parallel? On the one hand, I understand there are lots of work to do with the committee and so on. On the other hand, approvals are proceeding, you know, and so I'm wondering how do you want to coordinate this? Because eventually the products that are getting approved right now may not be approved once this committee is fully operational, you know, as you were pointing out before. So what is the way forward?
My suggestion is that you write to Dr. Vijay Raghavan, pointing out the concern in your view that there is a discordance between the decision and the publicized guidelines,
And what is happening on the ground.
and we will immediately bring it to the attention of the technical committee that we have this view from Bio, and we will get back to you with our discussions with them on the subject.
See, the important point, I think the important point is you took a specific example, but those specific cases will have to be examined by whatever process is in place now. But I think Dr. Bhan's very important point is the general concern you have is very important to be examined, and an email to me as soon as possible articulating this general concern would be very valuable in us giving feedback to the various
And we
committees.
will actually get back to you with our discussions with them.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think for sure this is something we can do because we know the kind of clinical studies that have been made, and absolutely we can bring this to your attention.
That would be very valuable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And on the topic of clinical trials, I know this particular session is to discuss biosimilars clinical trials. One of the questions that, again, I represent on behalf of the company here is the question about posting some of these results that have, or that could be publicly made available. So as you know, there is a mechanism through the FOI, perhaps, to get that information, or in India, mechanism. Is there any thought at the DBT to some of the decisions that elaborate here for us about is there a mechanism through which some of this information and the way the decision was made to approve some of these products and essentially communicate how the guidelines are being applied for us then to react and also to find a way then to react to this and respond in an ongoing way.
So let me just,
Thoughts on that?
yeah. So let me try to understand your question. So your question is, when decisions are taken, you would like a summary of the steps and the reasons for specific decisions to be made available. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. As opposed to now just being given the decision. Now this is a matter again which has come up during our discussions, and the aspects which are being discussed importantly with the Health Ministry and other committees is to keep in mind aspects which are important for you to know about how decision-making processes took place, along with complementary concerns about the confidentiality of specific kinds of processes being revealed. And I think that's not an inherent contradiction here. It's quite feasible to let one know the reasons for taking a decision, positive or negative, and I think that will actually also be in place along with these other decisions. Dr. Bhan, would you like to add?
The technical committee has been asked by the Parliamentary Standing Committee that all information should be displayed and made available. The Drug Controller's Office is concerned about some confidentiality elements which they don't think the companies would want to be disclosed. So this committee set up by the Supreme Court is trying to operationalize what part of the proposal or the decision process should be on display and what should be held confidential. So I think as soon as this committee finishes its job, an SOP for this whole process will be put in place. I received a communication from this committee, and it had this was one of the questions listed there, asking for my opinion. So my suggestion is, again, on issues like this, you do communicate with Dr. Vijay Raghavan, and we will bring this input to the committee. This is the right opportune time to bring all these issues to the surface for this committee.
Actually, both as a representative of Amgen and as a convener of this discussion, if you can write to me, it will be very, very valuable to actually put this perspective before the committees.
We must take these issues to the committee because their report, once approved by the Apex committee, is going to be difficult to change for a year, maybe longer. So this is a good time to raise all the issues, and Vijay and I and the other Vijay, we commit that we will actually take this to the committee and even provide you with feedback of our discussion with the committee. So we seize the...
Thank you, Dr. Bhan, and thank you, Dr. Vijay Raghavan. This is very important. It's not so much about having information of how other companies have done it. In a way to also accelerate our...
Absolutely. No, we understand that. Yeah. No, I think, there's no question that we here understand both your concerns and what needs to be done. And we just really need to make sure that we convey that well and clearly in the context of what is correct and make sure that the committee sees that. So I don't think there's a problem at all.
If I can change direction a little bit, and yesterday we had a couple of very good sessions. In fact, Dr. Renu Swaroop, who's sitting also here, she was leading a couple of big discussions, and one of the questions that repeatedly came up was the overall regulatory framework in India and the concern and question about multiple windows of approval. And Dr. Bhan, I know this question has come up on many other occasions before as to who is the regulator and how do we essentially then communicate to the companies here. Which regulatory body do we go to? Are we now opening up multiple windows for registration? And how do we essentially address that question?
You see, for pharmaceuticals, the Drug Controller of India is the last word. For biologicals, there is a certain scientific assessment that RCGM does for DCGI, but the final call and approvals are all given by DCGI. We have so nothing has changed in what was operating for the last couple of years. The Biotech Regulatory Authority bill has been introduced in the Parliament and it will go through a debate. At that time, some changes might occur, but right now, DCGI for all kinds of drugs or whatever comes under the Drug Act, for biologicals, some assistance for DCGI from RCGM and GIC. This is the process that has been on for the last couple of years. This is the process that is continuing until Parliament clears the Biotech Regulatory Authority. So nothing has changed.
The Biotech Regulatory Bill, by the way, is available on Parliament's website. You can take a look. It also points out this aspect that for biotech safety aspects, the regulatory authority which is being set up there will look at those aspects. But the DGCI will continue to look at the chemical development of the biotech drug.
As per DCA.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to change directions a bit and then bring others to comment on this one. One of the big topics, this morning I went online and I Googled India, clinical trials. And you can imagine it was a hot topic. In fact, it was very hot topic. So if I can start having some discussions around clinical trials, and I also went this morning on clinicaltrials.gov, and I wanted to benchmark as to what's going on in India, and I'm going to read out some metrics that I pulled together. And it's about relative metrics, it's not absolute. So I've actually pulled data from 2006 onward to 2013, just about the time when the clinical trials got started. And at that point, India had 25 studies going on. And in 2013, on January 1st, India had 716 studies. Okay? So there has been a substantial rise. But then relative, right now there are over 4 lakh studies globally, over 400,000 studies globally. So in relationship, the number of studies in India are still very small. But what's more important that if you now filter the information, out of these 716 studies, only 154 are open, at least the ones that are registered in clinical trials stuff. Now, I know we also have Mr. Vijay Kumar there from ICMR, and the question I have here is, are you seeing any impact in India at this point in terms of in companies cutting back on clinical research? And if the answer is yes, do you have any recommendations for multinational companies like ours, what we should be doing?
Well, Vijay, you want to say something? Sorry.
So maybe before I hand over to Dr. Vijay Kumar, I'll just add one broad point about where we are and where we are headed. I think there's no question that there is an acceptance all over India at every level that given the size and importance of health matters in our population, that properly conducted, properly regulated clinical trials are very important. India is not a country of the size of Liechtenstein, for example, where we can say we don't want clinical trials or we want clinical trials and switch from one view to another, right? So there's a complete acceptance on that. The second point is there's a complete acceptance that one has to engage with a variety of opinions, but also do so rapidly and address this problem well. And thirdly, there's also an acceptance that interactions across the spectrum with industry are vital if one has to address the needs both of our population and for India, and to partner with industry across the world to address the need of global populations in health. So this is an accepted part of our debate now. If there's a consensus on anything, it is that. And I think I'll hand over now to Dr. Vijay Kumar to give specifics about what's happening. Yeah, Dr. Vijay Kumar?
Yes, we have established clinical trial registry of India, where every trial has to be registered. And ICMR, always aims at promoting clinical trials relevant to the problems of India and developing countries. And we all support, all our non-communicable divisions support research in these aspects. So we welcome industry, anybody who is interested in developing drugs for Indian problems, Indian diseases.
So that was the ICMR's viewpoint about what kind of trials ICMR would like to do. Maybe Dr. Bhan can add more on.
Let us be very honest about this issue. The Parliamentary Standing Committee was reacting complaints from a lot of citizens, activists and others saying that best practices for clinical trials are not being followed. The sad part of India is that being a very large country, even if 80% is doing okay, 20% trials are not being done well. Some place ethics committee is not right, something or the other is wrong. So when they point out those issues, it creates a kind of pressure on the system that we must improve our practices. I think what happened with some of the recent recommendations on clinical trials, on compensation, on many of these issues, it has created a feeling even in our minds, in my mind, that this is not being handled with competence. And therefore it gives an impression that maybe it is too much struggle to do clinical trials here, whether it is for companies from overseas or it is from Indian academia or it is for Indian industry. So there is a certain amount of uncertainty that has been created by a capability gap in response to activism. I think we haven't handled our response to them capably. And we have given this feedback to the government very explicitly that while activism is welcome, citizens' opinions are welcome, Parliament's opinions are welcome, the Drug Regulatory Authority must respond with competence, with authority, with clarity. And I think we've fallen short there. But I am very happy with the way this committee is going about it, and it is my hope that in about 6 to 8 weeks' time, they will come back with corrections of some of these misplaced, misworded guidelines that have come up which are difficult to interpret. Even I am concerned, I don't know how to interpret them. Some of them are not implementable. So I have no shame in saying that some correction is required. The committee of the Ministry of Health recognizes correction is required. I had even a discussion at the highest level in the government recently when Vijay and I had gone together saying we need the drug controller's office to be lifted to a much higher status. We should even have a secretary level position. So I do believe that the perception that there needs to be more competence in the way we introduce best practices so that they are fair, they are transparent, they are innovation promotional, as much as concerns for safety of patients are upheld. So I think there is a transition at this moment. There was an overreaction, there was a misreaction, and that is being corrected. So give us a couple of weeks' time and you will be happy with the outcome of this committee. I have a lot of faith in this group because I think they have a lot of experience and they are consulting very widely and they recognize that something needs to be done. So this, in a few months' time, the air will be much clearer and the guidelines will be easier for people to understand, accept and follow. So things will be put in shape.
I should add, if I may, I think it's very important to keep in mind what Dr. Bhan said about how the structures are being changed. And from the context of the DBT, I would like to add that, one of the aspects of change is a dynamic response to changing technologies, new innovations, new ethical questions which constantly keep coming up. DBT is particularly well poised to feed constantly into the regulatory system best practices from all over the world. And interacting with you, with others all over the world, I think that's one important component of regulatory learning, which DBT is working hard to do, and we'll be happy to have your inputs on that.
Thank you, Mr. Vijay Raghavan, and thank you, Dr. Bhan. If I could marry three concepts together now. One is biotechnology, biosimilars, and then clinical trials. I think the underlying premise in all of them is patient safety. And I wanted to ask you the question from DBT's perspective. What is your philosophy and what actions would you take towards strengthening the pharmacovigilance structure in India?
We have to go by this pharmacovigilance issue. The view of this committee is to follow global best practices, and they are engaged seriously with this question. I don't know what their final recommendations will be, but I know that in the list of questions that have been posed to this committee, a clear position on pharmacovigilance and how this will be implemented is also on the table. So DBT for all purposes believes in adoption of global best practices. Our stand is very clear, but we should wait for this committee to go through its process and you will get a final position.
Is there something from the corporations, the multinational companies, the expectation, because we have a very robust process through ICH, for example, where we all put in our global clinical data to a system. And I know India has been trying for many years to sort of implement a more robust pharmacovigilance system. And again, given that about 40% of all the new products coming on the market will be biologics by 2015, or at least in development, and you being on the cutting edge of biotechnology in India, I wanted to get your sense if there's something else that you would like to promote from your side, which is different from the traditional small molecule pharmaceuticals, and something that we should be focusing on, and how can we as multinational companies help?
So I think, you've raised a very important point, and I think DBT is particularly well positioned to do exactly this kind of interaction which you suggest. There are two aspects of regulation, which I mentioned already actually. One is the regulatory system, which needs to be firewalled from those who are dealing with the technology and the science and promoting that. Yet, despite this firewall, there needs to be a porosity where these kinds of best practices from all over the world impinge on training the regulatory system. And that's where DBT is very keen on developing an institutional structure which allows interactions with industry, with multinationals, to get the best practices from everywhere, take local concerns and context into account about implementability and ease of implementability, cost of implementability, local concerns, and bring those best practices distilled in a manner which the regulatory system can use. Otherwise, we are going to constantly be making demands on the regulatory system of certain standards without it having the intrinsic internal structure to be porous to views from outside. So I think DBT is committed to this interaction with the regulatory system on one side and with people such as you on the other to ensure constant updating of technology and best practices.
I have a practical suggestion for you. I think BIRAC was created to be an interface between government and industry. You should more often use BIRAC, and Renu Swarup is there, she's the managing director of BIRAC, to give input of what you people feel is the global best standard, and BIRAC will be the conduit to feed this to DBT as well as to the Ministry of Health and DCGI's office. So, and BIRAC will be very happy to interact with the global industry on discussions on these topics. So we can, for example, plan a small interaction on pharmacovigilance and the best way to go forward, particularly also with regard to the biological.
I should also say that we have set up a independent think tank within, supported by DBT, to prepare policy documentation, and not just, these are not ethereal policy matters, but which have a practical core to it about implementability. And these biospace, as we call it, this think tank will also work with BIRAC and with you to ensure that we have applied documents, applicable documents available. So we are moving ahead on those fronts.
I'll pass on the microphone in a minute to Dr. Farooq. But before that, I have one other question that has come to me as a moderator here from the industry. And this is being co-sponsored by ABLE and CII, and we as multinational companies. I want to ask a rather difficult question, and almost a polarizing question. There seems to be a very polarizing relationship between the Indian companies, the local companies, and the multinational companies. As Thomas just asked a question, clearly he was representing the views of an innovative company. And yes, one would argue that some of the companies who are even making biosimilars are innovative. But this polarizing relationship can essentially cause disruption in some of the good practices that you mentioned. What might be good practices for a domestic company may not be good practice for a multinational and vice versa. Do you have any recommendations as to how do we bridge that gap and bring the two the local companies and the multinationals together so that they have one set of good practices?
Tell me one thing, when we came up with the biosimilar guidelines, did we take a scientific view of things, or do you think we were pro-Indian or multinationals? What is your own reading?
I think, Dr. Bhan, you have been very much engaged, and again, a lot of credit to your leadership. and you have engaged us. We have given comments, and I know you have gone with the concept of the WHO guidelines. And my question is not to question at this point what has happened by biosimilars, but again, the topic of good practices, the perception that what might be good practices.
Because the problem with good practices is capability. It is not because of Indian industries. There is a competency problem here in the regulatory system to cope with complexity efficiently and well. We need to invest our energy in strengthening the capacity of the regulatory system. Don't think that because the highest leadership of this country is repeatedly asking the question, are we compliant with global practices? In the vaccine area, the World Health Organization gives pre-qualification for products. It has brought in tremendous quality improvement in vaccine regulation because all companies in India know they have to go to WHO for pre-qualification to access global markets and UNICEF. We need to do something similar with drugs. We need to bring WHO more into the picture because WHO is neutral. If it sets the standards for regulation, neither multinational views nor Indian industry views will prevail. And I have seen this happen in vaccines. The WHO pressure on vaccines works very well. So my suggestion is we need a neutral body in this world to set standards. And I know India will never go against WHO recommendations. So you yourself gave me a lead by saying the multinationals should engage with WHO and say, play a more active role in creating best practices. When they endorse it, nobody will say it is from multinationals. When you say it, then the Indian industry or any other country local industry, because of business interest, is going to give a counter view. And the public gets confused. And you have to remember there is a background of need for affordable drugs. These are very poor countries. So it is very difficult to make a balanced argument in a situation where people have very little purchasing power. That's the reality of this world. So my suggestion is we should strengthen the hands of WHO to set up benchmarks for good regulation for drugs as well. It is neutral and it will work well. Think of approaches like that. This combating relationship is not going to work because it confuses public. And Indian public will always side with Indian companies because they think they are the source of cheaper drugs. Any poor country will do that. So I think we have to ask the question, what is the best way to create best practices? Capacity in the regulatory system in India and neutral bodies playing an engaging role. That's what DBT tries to do, is to be an honest broker. We are saying, what is the science saying? Forget multinationals, forget Indians. Whatever is the best scientific view is what we try to promote from here. So I think we should all work in the direction of, and I gave you a suggestion that use BIRAC more and more as a conduit of good practices because they will not only take your view, they will also look at the other reality and use WHO a lot more. Let us get WHO to participate in regulatory discussions on best practices. And those are the kind of processes that will help us move forward smoothly.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are encumbered by technology, but we are very glad to have you here, and we have a big group of people. Since we have only one person who can be on the hot seat, I want to get off the hot seat now and bring somebody else. So I would invite someone to help to give comments.
Who's the man with the yellow shirt?
Who's he?
Yeah, that's a nice shirt, Jagdish.
Hi, good evening,
Yeah.
Vijay, good evening, Dr. Bhan.
Hi.
It's really nice to be here. Part of the India faculty for the first time, and I'm representing, Karnataka and of course India as well. They're trying to move in many people to come and take a look at the states, not just Karnataka but other states as well. One of the things I just wanted to mention was that during my discussion, either at the lunch table or coffee time, I just happened to be bumping into people from the legal side. And I think one of the questions they have, the disturbance they have is the cancellation of the Novartis patent in India. So
So there's a lot of noise about that. I was just wondering, maybe I'm not aware of it. I was just wondering if DBT had come up with some sort of a safeguarding statement to the world, saying that so this is a unique case. We are here to help you out. What is it we can do so that people continue to have the confidence in India in terms of investments and bringing in new molecules.
Actually, both Dr. Bhan and I have gone through the Supreme Court judgment. We actually have met the highest officials in the government, and we fully understand that this is a decision made on the assessment of that particular context, right? There is no general statement about these kinds of things, and there is no general implications about that. So I think we need have no fear that there is no intention at the highest level in the legal system or in the government or in the legislature that innovation in any way needs to be or should be curbed in a manner which by using these kinds of processes. So I think we should very clearly view it as a one-off thing in a very specific context. Do ask your colleagues to actually read the judgment. It gives a analysis of the context and the timelines of how India signed on to the WTO and what happened before that and so on. So it's a peculiarly Indian one-off context, which I don't think we should worry about in any long-term aspect. I mean, if there is any other repeat of this, it would be again in a similar kind of situation. One should not generalize at all. Dr. Bhan?
Yeah, I totally agree.
You know, Vijay is absolutely on the spot that this is Supreme Court of India interpreting two legal arguments about how much value add and innovation there is. This is a legal interpretation of a particular specific situation. It is not a grand design or a government supported or endorsed view. The government also looked at it very carefully to see whether we have overstepped our global commitments. The government of India is very carefully watching whether any of its arms is crossing the line of our commitments.
See,
So
importantly,
it's just a single case.
yeah, importantly, Jagdish, if you read global press responses, such as in The Economist or the New York Times and so on, there is a feeling somehow that the right thing was done by the Supreme Court. But it's important to keep in mind that officials of the government of India, the DBT, the ICMR and so on, are not swayed by triumphalism of any kind. We are looking at the facts, we're looking at what are best practices, and we will focus on that, right? We are not, in that sphere of editorializing these kinds of aspects according to one's views about how things should be in the world. That is not relevant. What is the best practice? What's most important legally? And how can we serve the health concerns best in that context?
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Prakash Mehta, and I'm a patent attorney, intellectual property attorney in Wilmington, Delaware. We had visited India in February, and I have a follow-up question about the Novartis issue, the patent in the Novartis issue. And before I even launch into the question, I want to say that I actually favor the way the decision came out in India. Okay. However, I'm a U.S. patent attorney, also deal with obviously many jurisdictions in patents. This particular case, this particular patent is granted in multiple jurisdictions, including China, Europe, and the U.S. And especially Europe and China are very difficult jurisdictions to get patents allowed, and this was allowed. The point I'm trying to make is not that there was any flaw in the decision that the Supreme Court made, but more so that if the Supreme Court was correct in its assessment that the patentability does not exist, does that not reflect globally that India's laws are not sufficiently strong to, and someone mentioned multinationals, that's the issue as I see it, that are the laws not strong? I'm not standing for the decision. In fact, I would side in the same fashion with the Supreme Court and would come out in the same way.
Yeah, so I can answer that question. I should add that I should start by saying that this is a matter of patent law, and I'm not an expert, but let me tell you one quick point, my understanding of reading through the judgment. The peculiarity in this comes actually from an Indian context because of the timing of India signing on to international patent laws. And in doing so, there is a peculiar Indian statement and a context which says that the change should not be merely incremental. So the reason why this aspect doesn't apply in China or in other countries is I presume that the Chinese laws don't have this particular clause in it. So the Supreme Court is actually looking at a very Indian context of a law which is present in India. And therefore you see a peculiar outcome over there. And I think that's the short answer to it.
Would you agree with me that you may have two different benches come with slightly different interpretations on a borderline issue? And you know, courts are courts. Supreme Court judgments, you can argue with them, but you can do nothing with them. We can't do anything with them. They have interpreted it in a certain way. Another bench might have interpreted it in a different way. And it has happened in Supreme Court that it has disagreed with its own judgments in the past. I think, as Vijay said, this is a one-off case. And the two lawyers argued. I don't even know, and Vijay doesn't know how well they argued their points. This is between the lawyers and judges. We sit like you and try to absorb what the judgment is.
I'm actually very eagerly, with suspense, waiting for the U.S. Supreme Court judgment on the myriad gene patenting case. And that would be very, very fascinating. And I'm sure that no matter what the outcome, we will hear all sorts of views of this, exactly the same kind, multinationals versus so-called patient interest, as if they are contradictory, small industry versus big industry, and so on and so forth, privacy versus public domain and public health. So these debates are there for all of us to grapple with. We can't shy away from it, but we also should make sure that we don't pigeonhole people into views, because that stills the debate. There's always needs to be better regulation, better quality coming in as an outcome of these debates.
I guess my only point is the optics look not so great. As I said, from a legal standpoint, I know I side with the opinion that, like you mentioned, you read the New York Times and you read the Washington Post, and whoever, the optics don't look great. That's all the point was. But I appreciate your answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, it's me again. The
Hi.
one with the difficult. Actually, I want to add on a bit on this, but really not question at all any patent decisions and stuff like this. But I think, there are many things pharmaceutical companies do and develop that are not necessarily patented. You cannot get a patent for this. Nevertheless, the investment you are doing is considerable. So I'm wondering, are there any discussion, for example, at your end about regulatory data protection? We have these kind of systems, for example, in Europe. They also exist in the US. And I think this also can be quite a big driver for innovation. Not necessarily the one that deals with patent, but many other improvements. And I think here also the regulators, in fact, can play an important role and can manifest themselves as the driver of innovation. And so I'm thinking, do you discuss these kind of things at your end?
All the time.
All the time, constantly.
All the time.
Yeah,
That's
well,
great.
well, this
so
is a,
where do
yeah.
you stand with your discussion?
Remember, there are many stakeholders in India. You see, you have to remember, in a system where there is no mature health insurance system, decision making and the dialogue is tougher. When you say Europe does it, or US does it, or even China does it, you are looking at a situation, an economic situation, where the democratic compulsions are not as strong as they are in countries like India, because we don't have, 80% of the health expenditure is out of pocket. So it is an evolving healthcare system, and the debate is genuinely tough here. So it is a very challenging situation. To all the arguments, there are counter arguments, but we are all the time discussing these issues. I think as the health system matures, so will these possibilities for innovation increase. They have to go hand in hand.
I think you can look at the, in our discussions, what comes out are the similarities and the distinctions between two different contexts. If you look at small manufacturing or IT, these same questions apply there also, right? Yet, when we're talking about matters related to health, there's an important additional layer, all of which we have been discussing. So I think the challenge is to have a regulatory system which encourages innovation but impinges on the primacy of patient safety, which will be a public concern. And that is what we're grappling with. And because of there's a rapid exponential growth in the size of a biomedical enterprise and the health system without our processes keeping pace with the same speed. And that is the complexity of the challenge.
Well, I think my opinion clearly on this is systems like this even may help a lot your own industry in India.
For sure.
Because it also really values incremental innovation, which could be incredibly beneficial for the patient.
Yeah.
You see,
No
what
doubt.
I mean? So I'm really looking forward to your discussion and especially to a good outcome on this.
Yeah.
The Indian industry is also saying different things now than they used to say before, because they are also interested in innovation. So this field will level off at some point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I know it's very late in India, and again, thank you so much for coming to this meeting. I know Dr. Bhan specifically, I think we met first time in 2004, 2005, when you were with Minister Kamal Nath and also with Kapil Sibal, and you've been very passionate about this. And again, because of the leadership here, I know it's very late in the evening, and you are here participating even though you have retired. So again, I wanted to thank you on behalf of all of us, and again also to Vijay Raghavan.
He may have retired, but we haven't let him go.
Yes, and neither have we. So I wanted to again, on behalf of myself and all of us, thank you for your leadership and your continued leadership, which we very much value. Before we let go, I know there's been a lot of discussion yesterday, and I would like Dr. Renu Swarup to just give her concluding remarks. I know she just mentioned to me that she has already communicated with you yesterday, but for all of us to hear what she communicated to you and what you plan to do with this, I'll pass it on to Dr. Renu Swarup.
I'll open up her mail to make sure that she says to you what she communicated to me.
Good evening, sir.
Hi.
Nice to talk to you from the other side of the globe. You have the flavor of what has been discussed yesterday, and you've got a small group here presenting to you their specific concerns. There was a much larger, responding to the issues today because we have a follow-up session on exactly the topics that you've discussed. And that's going to make it very simple for us to respond to the issues now. And I'm sure there won't be many questions now in the follow-up session. But just to let you know that there were questions exactly on these issues, the concerns which have been raised to you. There was also, Susan Petroda had come in and these same concerns were raised in the session when he was there. And Dr. Bhan sir, what you have said is exactly what was said in that session, that let EBT and BIRAC together work on preparing a sort of a white paper, which doesn't only bring out the challenges, but it actually tells us what the solutions are, and more importantly, how do we implement those solutions? Because as you very rightly said, we need an implementation strategy. So how do we implement those solutions? How do we go ahead? And this was put as a collective responsibility of this group. So I, on behalf of this group, I'm actually going to request the ACCII and the bio organizers to summarize to us what the recommendations have been. We have, of course, taken our own notes, but as a formal summary of this session, if it can come to us, we can then work with them closely and see how we can take this forward. So this is what we have tried to convey. But if there's anything else that you also like
Well, I think I'd like to just add on to your last point, which is to say that such a summary from industry bodies such as ABLE, CII, coming through BIRAC is absolutely vital. It should be a clean, crisp document. These are exactly the kinds of documents which feed into policy, so we should do this really fast.
Right. So I'm sure the organizers here will follow it up, and I will also now be interacting with them in the next couple of days that I'm here and try and see how we can take this forward. So thank you very much. Is there anything else, Dr. Chauhan, would you like to say? So if not, then thank you very much and good night. I know it's late for you all.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Have a good
Thanks
time.
all.
Bye-bye.